Welcome to another weekly webinar here with Route Consultant. If you are here for the first time, if you've never met us before, never seen us before, my name's Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. And if you're not familiar with us as a company, our team ran hundreds of routes across the country in both P&D and Linehaul. And today, really what we're trying to do is to help current contractors that are still in the space understand all of the things in the macro economy and things that are happening in the FedEx space and in the logistics space at large to try to find the best ways that we can learn from each other and be successful and still be really profitable in this environment. And then if you're a new buyer, somebody coming in for the first time, we want to really help you understand what this space is so that you can make the right decision, that you can come in with eyes wide open and be successful from day one when you get into this space. Before I go too much farther, though, I do have a quick disclaimer that I have to read, as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Now, if you're here every week, welcome back. We're always happy to have you here. And if you're watching on YouTube, always happy to have you there as well. And again, whether you're brand new to the space or you are here every week, we always want this to be a place where we can come together, learn, ask questions, and really be successful together. So format for today, as normal, is that we're going to go over some content. We're going to go over some things to be aware of that are happening today. And then I'm going to go over any new things that are happening coming up event-wise and any of our new listings that have come out this week. And after that, we're going to have pure open Q&A. So if anyone has any questions about what we talk about today or anything happening in the economy, feel free to jump in and Alex and I will do our best to answer it. Now, for today, as crazy as it is already November, which means Thanksgiving is going to happen in, it'll feel like it's 3 hours away and now we're at Thanksgiving. And then it'll be Christmas and then it'll be 2025. And so what we've done is we've talked a lot in these past few months about how to prepare for the busy peak season from a volume perspective, those types of things to be aware of. But one of the things we haven't touched on is the environment that peak season takes place in and the weather events that you have to be prepared for to handle that. And so we've brought Alex Froome back on to talk through it all, give his perspective. So Alex, if you want to say hello, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, I want to say hello from wintry Colorado. So if you can see through my window, you can see that we're suffering from the first winter storms of the year.
And Alex timed it. He knew that storm was going to come. It was going to look exactly like this. That's why we chose the topic for today. No, it's funny. Alex is in Colorado. I'm in Nashville, and yeah, out my window it is 80 degrees and partly cloudy, but it's a little bit different perspective over here in Nashville. But I'm sure we'll get something this year, maybe.
I mean, you can always expect. I mean, I think every year I've been a contractor, and so just so everybody knows, two of my terminals or hubs that I operate out of are Memphis and Olive Branch, Mississippi. And just about, I mean, I've been a contractor. This will be my sixth peak that I'm going through. And every year there's been a winter storm that's shut down I-40 in some portion. Uh,
Yeah.
Tennessee is, I don't think owns any snowplows, and I don't know if they've ever
Maybe
bought
not.
salt.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but last year we had an ice storm. I literally couldn't leave my house for a week because they handle a couple of good roads, but my neighborhood, it was actually impossible to leave the neighborhood. It was like 2 inches of ice, and no one was coming anytime soon. So that was fun walking to try to find grocery stores. But yeah, so different environments, different things that'll hit you. But before we get into all of that, I think one of the things that we don't always think about with weather is how do you actually prepare for it? How can you get ahead of it? So are there any things that you do every year to kind of prepare your fleet and your team for the upcoming winter season?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the location of where I am. So in Noki, which happens to be up, past the Mason-Dixon line and actually does get snow on a regular basis, I put so all of my trucks have heater cords one in them. So what does that mean? It's so the Noki terminal actually has parking spots assigned to each truck or to each contractor, and each of the parking spots has a plug in it. And so you take your heater cord, it's called a block heater or heater cord, and you plug your truck in literally into the into the outlet to make sure that the engine stays relatively warm, so you can actually fire up a diesel engine when the weather drops below freezing. Because if you're not familiar with it, diesel actually has a pretty, I don't know if it's considered high or low, but it's a different level of freezing than gasoline does. So gasoline actually freezes at much, much lower levels, whereas diesel will freeze at higher levels. So it'll turn into sludge and your engine won't fire up in that situation. So this block heater is to keep the engine relatively warm in order for you to turn over your engine and start it back up. So that's number one. Now, in all my locations, anywhere, any place I have a team truck, I'm making sure that that truck has tire chains on it. Um, if you're not aware, you're actually not allowed to drive in the state of Colorado as a tractor trailer from September 1st through, I think it's either March 30th or April 30th, without tire chains. So, and then it's always good if you're driving along I-80 or I-90 or going anywhere across the Rockies that you have tire chains. Or even, I mean, you might get a freak snowstorm in the Sierra Nevadas or in the Sierra Madres down in California or in the Grand Tetons. So it's also worthwhile to have snow chains up there. I mean, you talk to the guys in Reno, they can't get out of Reno without tire chains half the winter. So it's always important to make sure that you have tire chains, especially for teams that operate out east, that are heading into the west, and then for anybody that actually operates in the Rocky Mountain area. Additionally, I make sure all my trucks have a gallon of oil on them, a gallon of antifreeze, and a gallon of windshield wiper fluid. Some guys like to have spare headlamps and headlights. Others like to have spare windshield wipers. I don't require that. I do require all my drivers to dispatch out with a cold weather jacket, closed-toed shoes with a non-slip tread, and then all my drivers have to have their gloves in their truck. So two things that I provide all my drivers. I provide all my drivers with a jacket and gloves. The shoes is on them, but I require them to always have those during the inclement weather period, just in the event that they run into inclement weather while on the road.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And so, how much of this are you doing yourself versus what's on the BCs? Like, how do you kind of make sure
So
that?
it's all my BCs. So my BCs are in charge. Like I come up with a list, I'll talk it over with them. We have a checklist that we've developed over the years to make sure that all our trucks have these items in them. And starting in October, they're going through and inventorying the vehicles, figuring out who doesn't have what, and then making sure everybody has everything by, and we typically do it by November 1st, because that's when you might start having winter storms in the Rockies. And I actually happen to run. I run through the southern side of the Rockies. I actually don't travel generally through I-70. But to give you a perfect example, I took an unassigned team run on Monday this week. No, sorry, on Tuesday this week. No, it was Monday. So I took it on Monday and was going to Salt Lake City, and the route took us along I-70. And we got ahead of ourselves and we contacted FedEx and asked for alternate routing so we could avoid the winter storm that I am suffering from right now. And so we took, instead of going up I-70, which makes the most sense to get to Salt Lake City, we drove along I-40, and then we're going to take, I believe it's I-15 north out of, through Las Vegas to get up into Salt Lake City.
Okay. Yeah. And so, all of these things that you're doing and you're having your BCs roll out, uh, is it just covered in the normal pre and post check, or do you do anything differently? Or are you checking more frequently to make sure during this time?
So, I mean, my drivers are, I mean, we remind our drivers on a regular basis to let us know when they're running out of oil, antifreeze or windshield wiper fluid. We remind our drivers on a weekly basis that this is part of your pre-trip and post-trip inspections to make sure that you have these kind of items in your tractor. We highlight in our safety meetings the importance of checking your tire pressure and then making sure that you have the appropriate amount of tread depth in your tires, as well as, making sure that you turn on all your lights and that your lamps are not hazy, so that you can actually get good visibility through your lamps, especially if you're driving at night in inclement weather. The other thing is we remind our drivers that it's Alpha Kilo policy that we don't drive through inclement weather. So if there's snow on the ground, if there's ice on the ground, if you have any worries or fears, we do not drive. FedEx does not pay us to get into accidents. FedEx doesn't reward us or doesn't give us, doesn't do anything other than an attaboy if we manage to get our packages delivered in a blizzard. Instead, actually, FedEx tends to punish us if we make poor decisions and dispatch in inclement weather. I just had a safety call with one of my hubs, and they reminded us that inclement weather strikes, and we do not want you on the road putting your drivers, putting the FedEx reputation, or putting the packages at risk. So FedEx senior management is 100% against dispatching. Now, that doesn't mean that dispatch or a planner might say, hey, I got these runs, do you want to go out and there's 4 inches of ice on the ground? You know, that's that 25-year-old,
That's
dispatcher.
what I was going to say is, have you
A little
found
bit.
it consistent across all senior managers, or there's some that try to push the envelope a little?
So I find senior managers are pretty consistent about it and pretty understanding. They are evaluated on the safety score of their contractors in their hub or terminal. And so they don't want to see accidents either. I mean, I don't know if they get bonuses or not based off of it, but they don't want to have accidents. So I mean, they are going to understand. Now, a dispatcher, you know what? That dispatcher's job is to get trailers off the doors and get those trailers delivered. So, it might be snowing outside and all they care about is that, well, I got to get 25 or 50 trailers off. So I'm just going to not do that and then I can get home and get in front of a fire, you know. So
So you said it's your policy, like no matter the amount of snow or ice, you never send out.
no, it's just it's not worth the risk. Now there are times where we don't like I remind my drivers to check the route beforehand, and there's a number of different tools that we use. Lytics is actually kind of cool. You can actually look at other vehicles and see the forward-facing camera for other vehicles and see what kind of weather they're facing. So we use that, especially in the winter, to look on I-70 and I-80 and I-90 to understand what is the weather like in Montana or in South Dakota. So my drivers are prepared, and then we can, if necessary, request alternate routing. Um, we'll try to avoid storms. Like if we know there's a big storm that's supposed to slam I-40 in Tennessee, and I'm coming from New Jersey back to, say, Memphis, I'll request and get approved from FedEx the ability to drive, say, through Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then come south through Indiana and Illinois to get to Memphis that way to avoid I-40. So it's actually kind of counterintuitive, but a lot of times it's better to drive in cold weather states because they actually know how to deal with weather. Like they'll have snow plows on the road, they'll be salting the roads. And so it's actually, it might look like really nasty conditions like it's outside right now in Denver, but they actually are plowing the roads. And so it's actually not, I mean, you still need to be careful and you still need to have your tire chains on, but it's not that dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's a good point, and it is counterintuitive because it's always like, oh, I'll just go through the South. But like you said earlier, we never have any plows, or we might have one to cover the entire state. So it is often dire straits over here. One, a sheet of ice is sticking around until it melts. And so if it stayed cold, it's staying cold. So when you do have drivers that are going through this though, like do you ever worry, like do you think all line haul drivers are capable of driving in these conditions?
No, no, I mean, most of them are not. I mean, most of them are, well, like I said, I have my drivers based out of Memphis and Olive Branch. They're
Yeah.
not prepared to drive in this. And so I definitely don't want them driving through this. And so I do a lot of times, they'll be like, oh, I can make it through. And we'll just make the decision for them and say, no, we're not driving through. You need to pull over. My consistent messaging to them is to pull over and wait out storms, advance the load to the next safest, truck stop, exit, gas station, fuel stop, rest area, whatever, and just wait out the storm. I mean, obviously you can't stop on a highway, but you can slow down significantly and just advance the vehicle to the next safest point, and then just wait out the storm there.
Yeah, so you said FedEx isn't going to ever make you dispatch in inclement weather, but if you're already out and you're telling your driver to stop or delay, is that ever a problem? Is that communication still easy?
No, I mean, you just needed to, I mean, communication is important, but FedEx is, like I said, I mean, for example, perfect example, right? Earlier this week, I had a run that went from Memphis to Salt Lake City. Okay. So the normal route takes you, north from Memphis until you get to I-70, and then you're taking I-70 west across the Midway, the plains, and then into the Rockies. And this weather storm came up. We were looking at it, and when it became worse and worse, and then the national weather forecast gave a storm warning for a blizzard warning for the Colorado Rockies. We got a hold of FedEx and said, hey, we need to divert. So, midway through the route, we, took a different highway south out of our way. It's more miles. FedEx is going to compensate us for us. And we went on I-40 to avoid the storm. And then we went to, further enough west so we could go north and completely avoid the storm. And FedEx was very understanding about it. In that situation, we just had to walk our drivers through what the alternate routing was.
Okay. So there's never any, if the delivery's delayed and late, like they're not going to give you point penalties or anything like that.
I've never ever suffered a point penalty. As long as you communicate in advance that this is a weather decline or
Mhm.
your weather situation, you just can't assume that they're going to know. But I mean, and the other thing is a lot of times I'll try to talk to a planner or a manager and not just talk to a dispatcher.
Okay.
So I'll call in and say, hey, I need to talk to a manager about an alternate route because of weather. And then, we'll get on and we'll talk through the different scenarios. Hey, this storm looks like, I mean, the same thing that happens with hurricanes or with, tornadoes. We'll have the same kind of discussion about blizzards.
Yeah. Is it first off, that's a great tip. I think for people who may not realize it, sometimes stopping at the dispatcher when you call in, they might not be the person who can actually solve the problem for you. So I think that's first off just a great thing to realize. Now, those are kind of unassigned and dedicated. Are spots different at all? Like, do you communicate the same if you can't take a spot, even though it's local?
Yeah, I mean, you have to communicate the same kind of thing. You're talking to that P&D manager in that situation. You're not really generally most spots are handled by P&D as opposed to dispatch. Now, one thing it's different with spots is that if they are able to build up enough freight, you might have to in your typical day is do one pickup. Um,
Mhm.
if they're actually able to run, their facility, you might have to do makeup or catch up, and you might have to do two spots or three spots depending on what the weather situation. Like for
Okay.
example, when Olive Branch was shut down, or when Tennessee was shut down for a lot of those ice storms last year, there were a couple spots that had built up of 3 or 4 days of orders because what it was is you were doing a pickup at a distribution center, not necessarily at a factory or a manufacturer. And the online orders just kept coming in. And so,
Mhm.
FedEx had to go and do multiple pickups. That carrier or that contractor had to do multiple pickups at that location to do a catch up. And then FedEx will usually they give you some time to do the catch up. They don't expect you to do it immediately, like dispatch 3 trucks in a row, but there is a time limit on how long they're going to allow you to catch up.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Does the buildup ever happen on like dedicated runs, or is it just if the terminal shut down, there's not much coming in either?
No, usually I mean, you'll have all hands on deck after a couple days. Like, you might have, especially if they're able to clear things out from the south or from the north. Like if you're able to like say all the loads from the north are coming, but all the loads to the south are not coming, or east or west or vice versa. Like so, if it's not shutting down everything, but it's only shutting down like half the market. So for example, a perfect example, say you're in KCMO in Kansas City, Missouri, right? And there's a winter storm that's hitting Chicago, but you're able to get loads from Dallas and from Denver, then you're going to have a buildup of freight in Kansas City that is going to need to get distributed into Chicago once Chicago opens up. And so in that situation, what you might have is they might say, hey, we haven't run for 3 days. We're doing an all hands call. Any additional power that you have, we're going to be sending to Chicago.
But yeah, and I imagine, inevitably winter normally happens at the same time as peak season. So It's where there's the most volume moving anyway. So sometimes that can be a little bit exciting if there's winter that coincides with like Black Friday deliveries.
I mean,
Uh,
it's usually, I would say, on the P&D side, it's much more, there's a lot more pressure there. Most of the terminal managers and senior managers on the line haul side understand that, we're driving 80-ton vehicles down the road. You definitely don't want an 80-ton vehicle sliding anywhere
yeah.
because the worst thing that happens is when that 80-ton tractor trailer combination becomes a toboggan, because then it can do a lot of damage.
Yeah, yeah, and it's good to hear that FedEx understands that, and obviously they do because they're the ones paying that insurance bill most of the time. So yeah. Have you ever had any drivers get stuck anywhere, or have your
Yeah,
policies?
a couple of years ago, there was a freak storm that happened in between Cincinnati and Illinois, and I had two drivers who left, and it was beautiful sunshine in Cincinnati. It was beautiful sunshine in Indianapolis, and as they headed west from Indianapolis to head to Champaign, they got a foot of snow.
Yeah.
And I actually had one driver who couldn't make it up the exit ramp, and he just sat at the exit ramp. Like, you know how steep the exit ramps are? He literally just sat there stuck until the police came. It wasn't considered an accident, but the police came and had to tow him off the ramp because he just couldn't pull himself up. The other one, I had a second driver who was doing the run, and he actually got involved. Wasn't an accident. He just drove off the road. That's what taught me the lesson to never dispatch my guys and just to tell them to stop. He was trying to advance the load to a rest area about 3 miles down the road,
Mhm.
and it got whiteout conditions and he couldn't see the road anymore, and he just happened to drive off.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I got assessed with an accident in that situation.
Okay. You kind of mentioned it, but are they more upset if it's an accident in those conditions than normal, or is it the same?
You know, I think they become a little bit, I get the sense they're sometimes exasperated. Sometimes they'll understand the situation and be like, yeah, there's nothing that just sucks, and be
Yeah.
like, those are that's what happens that's what happens. But sometimes they'll be like, why did you dispatch? Like,
Yeah.
what were you thinking? You
Yeah.
know, and sometimes they're like, wow, that's just crazy. Here's a preventable accident assessment.
Right.
You're like, great, thanks. Thanks for your consideration. I really appreciate your understanding and the award of this preventable accident. But
Yeah.
in general, I mean, they just don't want you dispatching. I mean, they are 100% ready for you to say, hey, no, we're taking a weather decline. And
Yeah.
FedEx will not assess you with anything in that situation.
And I think that's at the end of the day, the most important thing to hear is you should be doing a lot of preventative things and preparing your vehicles because you can't control the weather and sometimes stuff happens and you need to have drivers and your vehicles ready. But the contractual implications and driver safety implications from running in these conditions just don't typically make it worth it. If you go out and you get in one of these accidents, not only could you have a driver injured or someone else injured or the vehicle go down, but also that's a safety ding. And now we have metals coming up. So there's all kinds of things that trickle down that can come from one decision. And yes, you don't get the revenue for running that, but the potential downside and the risk of running are very high.
I mean, the greatest situation is that you get into an accident and then you have a vehicle damaged, and then you're paying indemnification to FedEx, but on top of that, then you're paying, your insurance has been struck, and then you have to pay to repair your vehicle.
Yeah, and it's peak season. You might not have any spare vehicles, or you might be at the top end of your capacity. And so if you've got a vehicle down, that could, really damage what you're actually able to do for the rest of the peak season. So that driver, if they're injured, could be, one of the drivers that you need to be successful during peak. So there's all kinds of things to think about, and typically just avoiding snow and ice as much as possible, but preparing for it in the events that you can't avoid it is the way to go. Perfect. So that's really what we wanted to cover on winter and preparing for it. We'll get to Q&A in just a second. I've seen a few come in, but while I'm going over the new listings this week and the upcoming events, feel free to add any additional questions, and Alex and I will get to it in just a second. So we have two new listings this week. The first is out of New York. It is 16 P&D routes at $2 million. This one has 23 employees, a manager, and it's a really profitable organization with a lot of vehicles as well. And the next one is out of Indiana. This is 13 P&D routes at 1.1 million. This one has 15 employees and a manager. And again, another profitable organization. It's fairly rural, but it has a bunch of spare trucks as well. So if you're interested in New York or Indiana, we've got those two P&D listings that came out this week. We can reach out to our team. We'll give you all the info that you need. Besides that, we have one more event this year, one more new investor summit this year, which are really designed to help those who are still trying to figure out if the FedEx is the right industry for them. And we host those in person in Nashville. And so the next one is actually next Friday, November 15th, in our offices in Nashville. And so we do have one or two spots left. So if you are interested in trying to squeeze in this last day of learning before we head into the Christmas, Black Friday and Christmas holidays, your last chance is next week, November 15th. So other than that, event-wise, we are going to have our whole list of 2025 events are going to come out soon. So soon you'll see where our happy hours and road shows and expo will be for next year. But for now, let's go ahead and look to the Q&A. So the first one I see here is kind of the questions about spot run transactions. And so if they are seeing that spot runs for sale, do those get to transfer in when somebody sells their business? What have you seen there historically?
Historically, they do transfer, but as opposed to a dedicated run or an unassigned run that's on your A1 and that transfers automatically. I mean, there is some potential. I haven't seen it ever happen, but there is the potential for those spot runs not to transfer because they're not contractually agreed upon. Now, there are spot runs that actually get put on an A1. I've seen those. There's actually a contractor that has like 18 spot runs in between the Dallas, Fort Worth, and Irving area, and his will contractually transfer over. So there is a little bit of risk, and I think that's why sometimes spot runs trade at a slight discount to where dedicated runs do. I mean, sell for, going back to my Wall Street parlance. So where they sell for in transactions, I think that a dedicated run, you'll get full value for that dedicated run. And whereas a spot run is, if it's not on an A1, there's going to be some, generally buyers are looking for a little bit of a discount there.
Yeah.
Just to handle the risk that it doesn't transfer.
Yeah. And I would echo what you said. And basically every scenario we've seen, they do transfer, but it is something where, it's not strictly 100% guaranteed, but it's like the way FedEx does it is they don't want any change. So unless you kind of mess something up when you come in, it's typically something where they just kind of leave it where they are. But I think a quick thing, Alex, just in case anybody doesn't know what spot runs are, can you give us just a quick overview of what a spot run even is?
Yeah, so a spot run is what you're doing is it literally comes back to spotting a trailer. So in the P&D world, a customer can deliver up to 200 packages in a stop. Okay, any point in greater than 200 packages, P&Ds then generally will switch to a box truck, or the customer might request that FedEx starts spotting trailers. So a spot is where a trailer is at a customer point, and FedEx is going to require a contractor to go out to that customer point and swap the trailers out. So you're actually going to do two drop-in hooks generally there. Though some customers are really nice and they'll actually pull the trailer off the door for you and move it into an outbound lot, and all you have to do is back a new trailer into the docks. But generally, what you're doing is you're moving in and you're taking one trailer off the doors and putting another trailer back onto the doors, and then you're moving that trailer back to FedEx. And you can there are contractors that'll have their driver do 10, maybe even 12 spots in a day. And they're quite lucrative. I mean, I would say a good spot contractor is making every bit as much money, if not more money, than a contractor that does only mainline hub area runs. Or sorry,
Yeah.
mainline runs in between hubs, like I do. I'm 100% mainline. I don't do any hub area stuff. I just go out to another, usually swapping trailers between two hubs.
Yeah, and there's definitely pros and cons to each. And like you said, I've seen people be really successful with spot runs, and it's just a matter of kind of understanding what they are and how to use them. It can add a lot of flexibility to your existing runs. It's just uh, I hear people talk about it different ways, and a lot of people don't even know they exist when they get into the line haul space because it's not something that's always advertised, but it can be a nice revenue opportunity.
Well, I mean, I would say that, the majority of runs and the majority of contractors that you see are working in a hub. Okay. And so in each hub, you're generally having 70 to, you might have, 35 to 70 contractors with somewhere between 70 and maybe even up to 300 tractors in one terminal. So that's where the bulk of the business comes from, moving trailers between two hubs. And so a lot of the spots are handled out in the stations where they're collecting freight from the customers and then they're delivering it back into the hub. That I mean, what a hub area by definition is like say Louisville feeding into Noki or like Carroll Stream and Wheeling and Joliet and Rock Island feeding into Chicago.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's jump to the next question here. So, are there other chain products besides traditional tractor tire chains that you think are promising? Have you seen anything here?
I mean, there's a lot of different opportunity or a lot of different options out there. I don't generally, I mean, I just go with the basics. I mean, tire chains are pretty easy. Once you teach your drivers how to put them on, they work great. They don't do a whole lot of damage to the vehicle. They don't do a whole lot of damage to the tire, so they're great. There are some guys who have like these like self-installing tire chains. I've seen those, and that's just just buy your standard tire chains. I mean, they've been around for probably been around since like the Roman times. There's no
Yeah.
reason why you need to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
literally. You know,
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's one of those things too, where, when your basic strategy is avoid snow and ice at all costs, you're not trying to invest in, three or four different other chain technologies.
And one thing to remember is like you need tire chains not only for your tractor and a tractor, but you also need tire chains for your trailer. So, if you are a team, you're going to need, I mean, a set of doubles has eight. So you're going to need a 16 additional chains on top of the chains that you need, the 10 chains that you need for yourself. So,
Yeah. Do you, this is something we didn't even talk about. Do you find drivers are comfortable, complain? Like, does it affect them driving in chains versus not?
I don't generally get complaints about driving in chains. I get complaints about putting chains on.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a pain. I mean, you have to lay out the chain and then drive over it and then kind of, it's challenging for like I don't have any solo drivers that do it, so I don't know and I don't operate like in the Rockies as a solo contractor, so I don't know what's that like. I can probably ask around like Eric or Mark or some of the contractors I know out here and say, hey, what it's like. But like it's a two-man job for my teams. One driver pulling the tractor forward or and then hooking it and then running the chains. I mean, literally what you're doing is you lay out the chains in front, you drive over and they kind of the chains grab onto the tires sort of and they kind of like wrap themselves around and then you just hook them up.
Yeah.
It's not that hard, but I mean, you do have to lay them out and it's a little bit of a, it's hard work. These are
Yeah.
heavy, the chains are not light, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not heavy, but they're not light.
Yeah. It's just an extra annoyance and doesn't help that they're heavy. So, yeah. Perfect. So, this is the last question here. We'll go over it. If anyone else has any additional questions while we're doing this one, this is your time. I will not give you another countdown. So, this last one here is, if they're starting as a line haul contractor, and we've talked about this a couple of times, but when you think about it as this is a 9 to 5 job where I have to be in it, every day, all day versus kind of I can, or, like what kind of time commitment do you see early on versus as you get a few more tractors? What kind of time commitment do you commit as an AO? Like, what does that evolution look like over like that first year or two and as you scale?
So I would say, I mean, I think the support network out there is so much greater than it was when I first came into the business, right? When I first started up, I was a four truck operation, and I was a one-man marching band. I did recruiting, I did payroll, I did accounting, I did, all my reconciliations, so all the back office function, that was me as the AO. I did maintenance reports, I scheduled maintenance, I was the backup BC, so I handled the graveyard shift. So like it was really challenging. And yeah, that first 6 months, I didn't take any pay. I was just like, I was living off of sailings, just trying to run this up. Luckily, I grew, I grew really quickly. But I would say, with the support network out there, you can get away with like this being a hobby for you up until probably about 7 trucks or 7 routes. Now, if you're doing spots, it's a different story. Spots actually require you to actually planning out logistics. Whereas, like if you're doing mainline or hub area stuff, FedEx is doing most of the dispatching, and so you're not doing a whole lot of scheduling. Um, and you can use a third party provider like Bright Flag to do recruiting for you. You can, how many accounting people are there out there? I mean, there's DMG Go, there's EBO Pro, eTruckBiz, Holiday Tech, My Ground Force is awesome, FX Forward. So there's all these back office solutions to make your life easier with like keeping track of stuff. So there's a lot of different options to make your life easier. There's easy IVMR now or a Truck Spy to handle your IVMR. So like a lot of the things that ate up a lot of my time when I first got into the business are gone. So I would say about 7 routes, mainline or hub area routes is probably where, one, you're making enough money that you can pay yourself a living salary. But two, um, you're getting to the point where you're going to have to be spending more time. Like your payroll is going to be more complicated. It's going to take more of your time. Um, can you do it with doing a second job? Yeah, but are you going to enjoy your life? Probably not. And one of the reasons why we become contractors is to have a lot of flexibility. Like I can do my job. Right now I'm doing it in a snowstorm, but I've done my job, in Boston. I've done my job in Washington, D.C. I've done my job, in Chicago. Wherever I have a cell phone and a Wi-Fi connection, I can pretty much do my job because I've built up a network and in an environment and an organization where I have managers handling a lot of the day-to-day responsibilities. And then I'm working on my business, not working in my business. And that, so I would say 7 routes is probably, 7 routes, 9 to 10 trucks is probably where you start, you're going to be working on your business as a full-time endeavor and you're making a good living wage.
And do you view that also as the threshold to add a BC, or is that a different story?
No, I think 7 is where obviously you would love to have a BC earlier because, I mean, it means that you're not getting woken up in the middle of the night. And trust me, even if you only run AM shifts, and I only run AMs, I still get calls at 10 o'clock at night or at 4 in the morning. Hey, just want to make sure that your driver is going to show up at 9. It's 4 in the morning. Why are you calling me at 9? Well, I just want to make sure I'm just trying to get my scheduling right. Yeah, I'll call you back at 7. How's that? I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times I've gotten that phone call. So, at 7 routes is really where you can have a full-time BC and you're making enough money. It's where you're making enough revenue that you can have somebody who's going to be a backup driver and handle your BC activities and still pay yourself a living wage.
Okay, perfect. So Eugenia, hopefully that answered your question. And if you have more, you don't have time to ask it because I gave you that countdown. So, but if there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any right now. So Alex, again, thank you so much for being here in the busy time of year where I know you've got weather as well. It's always a pleasure to have you on here.
Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. It's always my pleasure.
All right, see you, Alex. See you, everybody.